World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars, July 28, 1914, and November 11, 1918. Veterans Day is in the 11th month, on the 11th day, in the 11th hour. The Allies or Entente powers were Great Britain, France, Italy, Japan, Russia until 1917, and the U.S. did not enter until 1917. The Central Powers are Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman empires. World War I sees the demise of three empires, Austria-Hungary, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire. The direct cause of World War I was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. There are other factors, too, which made Europe a powder keg. There was military expansion, especially on the German side, leading to an arms race and entangling alliances. There was imperialism, which we talked about in the last PowerPoint, long-standing ethnic differences and rising nationalism in the Balkans. The German states had just unified into a single nation by Bismarck. The French resented the loss of territory in 1871 during the Franco-Prussian War. They lost Alsace-Lorraine. Nationalism was a big cause. It is a way of thinking that says that some groups of humans, such as ethnic groups, should be free to rule themselves. Nationalists think the best way to make this happen and avoid control or oppression by others is for each group to have their own nation. The Schlieffen Plan. Count von Schlieffen was a German field marshal. His plan had the intention to ensure German victory over the Franco-Russian alliance by holding Russia off with minimal strength and swiftly defeating France by a massive flanking movement through the Low Countries, which would be the Netherlands and Belgium. The First Battle of the Marne. General Helmut von Moltke sent his forces to Paris. He was outflanked by the British and the French. The casualties were in the hundreds of thousands. The battle was a stalemate, and both sides began digging a network of trenches. This is a picture of trench warfare. Notice the mud, and notice the water, the cramped spaces. The centuries-old method of massed charges to break through enemy positions did not work. Men faced machine guns, barbed wire, and drastically more effective artillery than in the past. Some of the new weapons of World War I, some horrible weapons, were flamethrowers, mustard gas, machine guns, tanks, airplanes, and submarines. Russia leaves the war. The Chief of Staff, Erich Ludendorff or Hindenburg of Germany, arranges to have Vladimir Lenin return to Russia. Lenin helped fuel the rising revolutionary fervor and the introduction of communism. The Tsar was deposed and executed with his family in March 1917. The Brits, to aid the Russians, thought about getting the Gallipoli Peninsula, which is in Turkey. Instead, the Australians got slaughtered, and Churchill is to blame. Prince Faisal, third son of the Grand Sharif of Mecca, waged a successful guerrilla war in the Mideast. T.E. Lawrence of Wales, who became known as Lawrence of Arabia, helped with their fight. When the war broke up, the Ottoman Empire was broken up. They were divided into states of interest for France and Great Britain, and especially because of the discovery of oil. They were never given to the Arabs as promised, and problems causing turmoil in the Middle East today had their origins there. War at Sea. One of the new weapons of war was the development of submarines or U-boats. They attacked merchant or passenger ships. They had unrestricted submarine warfare, which really angered America. No warnings so that passengers could get into lifeboats safely. And of course, one of the sinkings of ships that had American passengers was the Lusitania in 1915. 1,200 lives were lost. 128 Americans died. The U.S. threatened to cut off diplomatic relations with Germany. The Germans instead blockaded England to starve them because no ships could get there. And they sunk more U.S. ships. So this is really going to increase the hostility the U.S. feels towards Germany. War in the air. The age of the airplane really hadn't come. They're very kind of primitive airplanes. They're used primarily for reconnaissance, including photo reconnaissance missions. No serious effort has been made to create a fighting flying machine. Pilots began shooting at each other originally with pistols and rifles. Then they attached machine guns to planes. So this is the Red Baron. Multi-engine bombers such as the giant Zeppelin here bombed British cities. The U.S. enters the war. President Woodrow Wilson won re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." We got drawn into the conflict by the Zimmermann Telegraph and unrestricted submarine warfare. And the Zimmermann telegram was the thing that really broke the camel's back. It was a coded message to the German ambassador in Mexico City. The Germans would return to unrestricted submarine warfare on February 1st. To convince Mexico to become Germany's ally, Germany would return Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, parts of California, and Utah to the Mexicans. The code was broken, and the contents of the telegram got published on March 1917. The U.S. declared war on April 5th, 1917. The shift of balance turns to the Allies. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicates on November 9th. This is Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany. Agreement between all combatants called for all guns to fall silent on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. The conditions, and this is probably a cause of World War II. Germany was restricted to a standing army of just 100,000 men. They were denied possession of certain weapons such as tanks. They had to give up all their overseas colonies. They lost Alsace-Lorraine to France. The biggest one was they had to pay $5 billion in reparations, and that is an enormous amount of money back then. The cost of war. It estimated that it cost 10 million military deaths, plus 20 million more crippled or severely wounded. Estimates of civilian casualties are hard to make. They died from shells, bombs, disease, hunger, and accidents such as explosions in munitions factories. Then, if the cost of war wasn't hard enough, there was an outbreak called the Spanish flu pandemic. Between 20 million and 40 million died around the globe of the Spanish flu of 1918. There were over 500,000 deaths in the U.S. alone. In World War I, battle deaths equaled 53,402. Not in battle, 113,842. The Spanish flu was named the Spanish flu, not because the origins were there. They think the origins may have been in Kansas. But it was named that because the Spanish people were the only ones that were reporting the flu. They did not participate in World War I. American President Woodrow Wilson. His greatest accomplishment was the League of Nations. It was ratified by 42 nations in 1919. It established a permanent international body to maintain peace in the post-war world. Congress thought the treaties reduced U.S. authority. Wilson had a stroke in 1919, and the dream of the League of Nations failed in the United States, but still gained power in the other countries of the world.